Jazz Club. Really flying the music. Okay.
So here we go. Let's get into the death of Cliff Huxtable. Tonight we're starting with the foreword and the prologue to the book. The book I wrote in 2015. It really I had no intentions of it being a book. It was never supposed to be a book. It was supposed to be one blog post. It was supposed to be one entry. In 2015, allegations, more and more people were coming forward saying that Bill Cosby had done a thing. And that thing for the different women who revealed their stories, much of it was similar, some of it was different, but across the board, there was this heinous act that was done either in repeat or in, different variations of it. And, just like with our idols, when they disappoint us, when they do things that you can't really come back from, it's difficult to say, oh yeah, he's done a thing or she's done a thing, and I can forgive that, I can overlook that, and continue to celebrate who they are and what they do. It's kind of hard when you have someone who appears to be this predator but also has this body of work that you love. And it's difficult to unlove that. And I think a lot of people were going through this similar cognitive dissonance that I was experiencing. And so I wrote a monologue. It was just basically the inner workings of my mind. Stream of consciousness. What would Theo say if his father died and this piece of purity was taken from him? And that's what it felt like, in a sense, this piece of purity. I mean, fictitious characters can be pure because they're fictitious. They can be void of fallacy, right? So I wrote Theo as a monologue, as just, this inner thing that was happening. And I posted to my blog site, and, a few thousand people read it, and it just kind of, had a little baby viral moment. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. Until someone said, well, who's next? Who are you going to do next? And I was like, that was it. Ta-da. And I got to thinking, and I said, okay, well, I'll keep this going. Because the response was, this was helpful for me to see that Cliff and Bill are two different people. Mm-hmm. And I could prove that they were two different people by, in fact, killing one of them. Now, clearly, I can't kill Bill, and I have no interest in doing that. But what I could do was show that I could illustrate Cliff as having been deceased. And if you chose to go later that evening and turn on Nick at Night or wherever the Cosby Show might have been playing at that time, you would see him. He would still manifest right there. And real living people don't do that. So it turned into this cathartic experience, not only for myself, but for a lot of people who read it. And so then it became an ongoing series on my blog site. And then a friend turned me on to fan fiction and gave me a book. I can see it on my bookshelf over there. I wish I thought to grab it, but there's a book over there called Krypton. It's called Krypton. And it's about my favorite fantasy character, Superman. And it's actually his origin story. In fact, Clark Kent or Kal-El never shows up in the story. It's the story before he's born and the eventual demise of Krypton. And it was written by someone completely different, separate from DC Comics. And she said, this is fan fiction. And fan fiction, is the love of the original content. It's the love of the source material. And it's inspired by the source material. But see what happens with it. And so I decided to continue to write this in the present day, what the Huxtables might look like in present at the time, 2015, but in a post 9/11, a post Barack Obama administration, or almost post, in a Black Lives Matter timeframe context, and the Huxtables looked incredibly different. This is also not only with the allegations of Cosby coming out, but it's also on the resurgence of the Me Too movement, and so infusing these relevant contemporary social engagements onto the Huxtables really reinvented and reinvigorated that narrative for me and ultimately for others. So tonight, we're going to start with the foreword and with the prologue. And so before I, without lingering, I would like to introduce you to two amazing people who are going to join me in our discussion tonight. First, I want to introduce you to Slam, the poet. Slam is an amazing talent. She's a spoken word artist based in Washington, D.C. She's originally from New York City. And when I was crafting the book, there was no person I could think who could better set up the book in the same way the episodes of The Cosby Show were set up with the opening themes with the jazz and the dancing and the fashion and the, just the feel of an amazing time with a family in New York City. There was no one who had a better voice for that in my mind than Slam, the poet. So she's going to be joining us tonight and reading the prologue that she wrote for the book. And we're also going to hear tonight from Darnell Lamont Walker. Darnell will be presenting the foreword that he wrote for the book. I turned to Darnell because Darnell and I both grew up in Charlottesville, Virginia, and a lot of the things that really impressed us as youngsters growing up in Central Virginia, we laugh a lot and we banter back and forth about those things that we were raised on, and we have a common experience when it comes to the Huxtables, when it comes to Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, when it comes to the Electric Company, even when it comes to Little Bill. And so Darnell, I asked him to write the foreword to the book, the introduction that gets us into the book, because we have the same heart in that respect. Yeah, we'll just start the evening off with both Darnell and Slam. There they are. Hey.
What's happening?
Look, Slam is so daggone cool. She's too cool for all good. So they say, hey. I'm Slam. Poet. Yeah, what's up? That's her vibe, though. That's her mood. I love it. I dig it. You get exactly what you get, and that's what you want. And then they go Darnell with his hammock in the background. That's about right too. That's on brand.
I'm getting in there at some point tonight.
Well, guys, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on and being a part of this kickoff for the series.
It was the Sunday. It was June. It was 2005. It was Daytona Beach, Florida. I sat still, hot and nervous in the Volusia County jail cell, reenacting the petty theft, the chase, and the capture in my head. Reliving that shameful moment proved easier than looking across the cell at the only man I'd see for another 7 hours. He was brown like sepia and me, much shorter, and his eyes, I'm sure, had we been sitting in the dark, would glow like a backwoods animal digging through the garbage at night. He was charged with violating probation after a murder conviction and conditional release, so understand my inability to comprehend why we shared this cell. I needed to know. I wanted to know. He stopped pacing and began biting his nails, and each time he moved to a new finger, my heart would calm more. When he reached his last thumb and spat out the jagged nail, he looked over to me and chuckled, then rolled his eyes back to his fingers and started working on the meat. I'd only heard stories about this place and about these men. The door heavier than I imagined, the man more compassionate than I imagined, more familial. We could have been kin. Isn't it calamity that makes us cousins after all? Calamity is why we're here. 2 brown boys, backwoods animals, in black and whites in a sterile white cell, just waiting. 2 men, both rather peculiar. share a space barely bigger than a single body, and not enough time for the seemingly benevolent one to find the connection. 7 hours and I was released. Dr. Heathcliff Huxtable must have known such Sundays. It's 2014, and I wake up at 8 a.m. to news saying Dr. Heathcliff Huxtable, a man I deeply love, was about to be dragged into the public square to be shunned, stripped of everything good, and possibly made to disappear. Wait, that's not exactly what happened. I woke up to Bill Cosby being vilified, not Dr. Heathcliff Huxtable. The truth is, somewhere around 2004, I had already washed my hands with Bill due to the respectability politics, but held tight to the thought that Cliff was going to come back and save us all. After all, he's done it before, right? I close my eyes. For a few more minutes, I sleep, and suddenly it's Sunday afternoon in Brooklyn, and the house smells of callaloo and an almost baked cake. John Coltrane's In a Sentimental Mood softly plays from the record player everyone is surprised still works. Claire, still amazingly beautiful and graceful, sits on the new sofa, shoes up, feet up, swaying her head to the music, anticipating her husband opening the door from his basement clinic and falling in love with the aromas and her. She doesn't know he's in the basement with the client who's been drugged, stripped, kissed, and entered. My eyes open, shaking loose the thought, unable to merge anything so vile into Cliff. Suddenly, I remember freshman year in college, and Dr. Thompson telling me that even the most heinous creatures can be the most amazing parents. It's 1 p.m., and stop confusing Bill Cosby with Cliff Huxtable has come from my mouth and fingers no fewer than 100 times to those who'd rather run to defend such a great man. What is true is we rode on the knee of Dr. Heathcliff Huxtable and held our arms out like an airplane, and life was good. Our eyes lit up when we were handed Monopoly money and taught to budget should we ever move to Manhattan with the girlfriend. In the house, we met musicians like Sammy Davis Jr., Stevie Wonder, Dizzy Gillespie, Joe Williams, Miriam Makeba, Lena Horne, Nancy Wilson, and even Alicia Keys. We saw artwork by Varnette Honeywood, Ellis Wilson, and Cynthia St. James. In this house, we became culture. We wore suits to dinner, and we pulled out the fancy dishes when friends came to visit. Now we're standing on the street, watching the man in charge of the wrecking ball wait for his orders to swing and demolish this house. Our house. Perhaps they won't. After all, Bill Cosby never lived there. It's not so strange that Bill Cosby was never a guest at the table, asked to listen to records in the basement, or seen out and about in Brooklyn Heights. Dr. Heathcliff Huxtable made sure his children steered clear of men like Bill Cosby. The house must stand and the plaque must be put up immediately. It's Sunday in Brooklyn, and we've closed both ends of the street, and we're all sitting out, grilling, talking, laughing at Cliff's jokes, and basking in the moment we're all afraid will end too soon. Jeffrey, the neighbor, comes out with the paper and briefly mentions the drama surrounding Bill Cosby's allegations. The women shake their heads and exchange a few words, and their husbands' hands find their way to their wives' shoulders. And now the conversation is about the summer heat. It's 2015, and there are generations of humans who cling to reality television to shape their worlds and will never know the importance of The Cosby Show. They won't look back uncomfortably at the 7 years, 7 months, 11 days Dr. Heathcliff Huxtable shared a small space, no bigger than a single body, with Bill Cosby. And perhaps it's for the best. I imagine looking at Dr. Heathcliff Huxtable as an outsider, not as one of his children like I become, makes it easier to lower the guillotine. To watch his head roll through the streets, leaving a trail of blood from the stoop at 10 Stigwood Avenue all the way through Brooklyn Heights. I won't be present at the execution. Instead, I'll find the bunk bed from which I watched the April 30th, 1992 episode and cried silently for the loss of a great man known as Cliff. And I will cry again.
Wow, man. Excellent job. Thank you so much, Darnell. Tell us about the piece you wrote. How did you arrive at the opening imagery? Tell us about how you crafted this.
You know, I remember when you asked me, and it was immediate. I'd been in conversations, like I said, in the foreword all day about these being two different people, and I think I've always lived with the yes and so it was always but Bill Cosby's a good man, and I'm like, yes, and he's this. Right. And so I had to find a way to work that, because I think so many of us are yes and. It's like, yeah, we've all done a lot of things in our life. Not as, some of us haven't done things as vile as they say, Bill Cosby's done. But we've done things and we are still good people. And so I wanted to somehow bring that about. And it was just this thing that just came up. I don't even know how I thought about Daytona Beach at the time. It was like all this. I was like, oh, I'm about to talk about me going to jail for 7 hours. And it was crazy, and it just poured out. And it's funny because I think, like, when I write things, like, I could write something today and look at it tomorrow, and I'd read it, and I'd have no idea who wrote it, and so because there are pieces in there that are about me, I'm like, oh, because when we start talking about doing this series, you're like, oh, I want you to read it. And I went back and read it, and I was like, did I write this?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm scared. No, but and it just poured out. It just poured out. And it finished, and I'm sitting there reading, and I'm like, yeah, I think that these are all my feelings around it. Like, I think we can still love Bill Cosby. I mean, he's the reason I went to an HBCU. He's the reason I thought about college. I was so hurt when I found out Hillman wasn't a real college, cried for days. I was like, I want to sit on the fire escape in my apartment building like Dwayne, and so when it all happened, it was like you said, you're losing that, like the fictional character loses that pure part of them, but I think we lost so much of us too. And I just wanted to get all of that in there. Mm-hmm. So it just came out.
Yeah. Relating to how much of a cue we took from Cosby's work, whether it was A Different World or The Cosby Show, or going back to, Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids. For me, nothing jump-started my curiosity life, my life of wondering what the world looks like, more so than The Electric Company. The Electric Company, I could count probably on both hands how many episodes as a kid, how many episodes of the Sesame Street I watched, or not the Sesame Street, just Sesame Street. I didn't watch Sesame Street as a kid. But I did not miss an episode of The Electric Company. And there was this sort of rhythm to it. There was this funkiness to it. And I probably was a teenager before I knew that Bill Cosby had anything to do with it. And not knowing that it was the research, it was the basis for his thesis or his dissertation when he was getting his EED. Yeah. And so he crafted the show to show that people of color are capable of learning all the same principles, but we can also layer on aesthetics such as music and jazz and color and paint and design and all these things to help, just kind of make learning vibrant. And thought, not only did I see that and go, that's for me, but I saw it and went, that's how I want to do it. Like as a teacher and as an artist. Nina Barreto, Morgan Freeman. I mean, a lot of these people we see today and celebrate, we're giving all of their flowers, giving them all, all the things. That's where they started. Absolutely. And so it's hard to, like you said, it's hard to look at Cosby and go completely, because we've taken so many cues from that experience.
Yeah, like for me, watching The Cosby Show growing up, I remember the episode, and I think, I look back, and the episode came out when I was like 4, and Rudy wrote a fairy tale, and and they had this whole fairy tale land going, that whole episode, the dream episode, and I sat there and I remember thinking, I want to write a story, so I wrote this story about this little boy who ran away to this place. And I left it in my room, like on a desk or my bed or somewhere. And I came home from school and my parents were in the living room, like with the letter crying because they thought it was a true story that I had run away. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I'm a good writer. And I'm like 7, I was like, literally, I was 7 years old thinking, I can write. And that was it. And from that moment on, I'm like, I'm going to be a writer. This is what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the Cosby Show did that. And so it was like, I can't give all this up.
Yeah.
You know, and it's tough.
There's a whole generation of students who went to HBCUs because of A Different World, without question.
Absolutely.
I'm just a little bit younger than Lisa Bonet. So I was still in high school when A Different World, I was still in, I was at James Madison University when A Different World hit its height. And I'd already chosen a PWI. And I loved James Madison University. I loved my experience at JMU. But JMU was, at the time, 11% people of color. That was Black, Asian, Latino, everyone together. 11%. 5% Black. So there weren't many of us. But every Thursday night, we made our way to the student union and we together watched A Different World. Every Thursday night at 8:30, we were there. And for a half hour at the very least, we felt like an HBCU. We felt like that community. I think even HBCU or PWI, I'm not going to get into comparing the two because I now teach at a HBCU. I'm getting my PhD at an HBCU. And I look back and I go, should I have made a different choice? But no, I walked the path that that was laid for me. But the thing is, with A Different World, and what we found with each other at JMU during that half hour was community. We found each other, and it just strengthened us through the rest of the week. It's funny when you say, well, I measure how my week is going to go by Monday, and if I feel like I've made it through Monday, and Thursday was that. Thursday was, I made it through Thursday. I got a whole weekend ahead of me. I got, I got A Different World. I got all these things ahead of me. And so, yeah, we took that cue from Cosby and from that show, from A Different World on that. One final question before we then go to Slam. April 30th, 1992. That was the last day of The Cosby Show, the final airing. It's also the first day of the LA riots. And I remember being at JMU in class, and people were like, you got to turn on the news after the Rodney King, the sentencing, the lack of sentencing, I should say, of the cops who beat Rodney King. And people turned to Cosby. They, the commercials, everyone was like, go home and watch The Cosby Show. And one thing we're going to get into on Thursday with the Theo episode is this clashing of politics and respectability and Black Lives Matter. And you bring up in your piece that it brought you to tears to see that show go. But you also spend a lot of the forward talking about someone that I don't know if Cliff, Huxtable, or even Bill Cosby, actually, for that matter, would see as someone, you describe yourself in the prison cell, literally and figuratively, holding a space that you're locked into, right? What are your feelings about where those two places converge, respectability politics and the activism of being on the ground and being in the midst of things when maybe those two things don't mesh, that being on the opposite sides of a single coin? Yeah.
It is tough. And I think for me, like I've long been an activist. I've long, fought. I was in Baltimore and in Ferguson and so forth. And I know that, and so when I speak in the foreword about me giving up on Bill Cosby many years ago because of his respectability politics, I know that through his eyes, most of the things that I've done in my life and many things I've done in my life are, not acceptable. But through the eyes of Heathcliff Huxtable, I felt welcome, no matter what that was. And it was, like I watched A Different World and I was absolutely Ron, absolutely. There, I got locked up. It was like, you have all these things. And I feel like, and it's strange to see, like, I don't know if there was a turning point for Bill Cosby, when creating this, because he created this work, or if it was the team that actually created these things, that said, let's address these issues. So on one hand, I feel very welcomed by Cliff, and on the other hand, I feel very vilified by Bill. And it's like, yeah. And so it was easy to give Bill up because of that, because I just couldn't. He'd make you feel bad about yourself. And there are people who, fight and continue to fight for him and defend him. And I'm like, but he wouldn't do the same for you. Oh. And he's spoken out against you many times, and your children. And so, I'm not even sure if I answered the question, but I think that, that's it for me.
Our prologue for the book was, again, written by Slam the poet. And if you recall the Cosby Show, every season, the premiere episode of every season, you had this new opening to look forward to. You were curious to know how the Huxtable family were going to sing and dance their way into our homes, and how they would open not only that first episode, but how the episodes would open for the season, and what feeling, what tone, what emotional temperature you would ride in on a season's worth of Huxtable. How would they set that up? Is it jazz? Is it some sort of beboppy sound? Is it, is it the sweaters? Is it the button-up tuxedos and evening gowns? The ballet. Fourth season, the ballet I thought was probably one of the more interesting openings. It wasn't my favorite, but that actually is us. We can be ballet dancers, Misty Copeland. We can be jazz performers, and we can be as eclectic as all of those openings. And so Slam wrote a prologue that is worthy of that. And I'll just turn it over to her. Slam the poet presents our prologue.
For girls and boys like me, despite having nothing to do with your reality, some memories lay inside you the way songs do, I suppose. The Cosby Show was for me and kids like me an escape into better, where parents stayed together and home was an actual place instead of just a feeling. It didn't include poverty or moms with asthma. Denise was never laughed at for wearing the same clothes twice in 1 week. Vanessa got to like Robert instead of being told she was fast or too young, or words created just for young girls to make them ashamed of their own bodies. It included grandparents who would cup your small face into their hands and say, "How is my grandbaby?" And I bet that didn't smell like Bacardi neither, or cigarettes. I bet Anna smelled like roses, and Russell smelled like some sort of old musky scent that is both soft and strong. A scent that announces a man who demands respect is here. I bet they never had to share medications or use a tea bag more than once. When the doorbell rang, people just walked right up to it and opened it. You don't just open your door in Brooklyn. There is a general unease in doorbells ringing with no notice. No one threatened to cut your face for being light-skinned or thinking you were cute. In fact, envy, disguised as violence, never really visited the Cosby home. You could have nice things without worrying they would be stolen or you would be robbed. Claire never had to decide between eating or buying stockings. When she spoke Spanish, she did so with honor and pride, and it sounded both sexy and intelligent. It did not have the stench of rough English attached to it. Speaking more than one language made you smart instead of an immigrant. Cliff didn't have to get a card from the dollar store and hastily throw $40 in and write "Happy Birthday" to a child who didn't really know him. The lights never went out because they fell behind on the bills, and there was, as far as I can tell, always juice in the fridge. They danced in their living room. We danced in our living room. It was perhaps It's one of the only things that made me feel as if I was living like them. Brooklyn. That Brooklyn was safe. That Brooklyn didn't have teeth that chewed through childhood. That Brooklyn didn't have men trying to make little girls grow up too fast. That Brooklyn didn't have young men dying for sneakers or coats. That Brooklyn didn't have beepers or sidewalk drugs. It didn't create a need to sharpen your tongue or know how to fight. Little children shouldn't have to know how to fight. It stood for the other side of things. How we knew that Louis Armstrong and Tito Puente were both gods. How beautiful women like Claire could sing with Plácido Domingo, and her voice would outshine his. All forms of art were celebrated. Dancing, singing, painting, artists, teachers, comedians, musicians, and so much more. It used to take my breath away. Teaching, by the way, is not an accident. Teaching is art in motion. And they got that. They really got that. The dizzying beauty of talent that looked like me and sometimes didn't, but somehow made me feel represented. We know how beautiful we are. We know how talented and exceptional and rich we are. But what this show did was give it to the world. The best of us. All of us. The better version we sometimes need to survive what is. That's what the show did. And so I'm very protective of my memories. I'm very protective of the very thing that protected me. I don't want to turn it into a reality we can't escape from. I don't even want to be reminded of what this show shielded my eyes from. I just want to honor it. So let this be both an introduction into the future and a closing of the past. Let this be what I wasn't aware I needed. Let this be the preservation of the better inside all of us.
There is healing in poetry. There's healing in art, right? And that point when you say, I will let go of something that has cradled me, and I will look forward to what tomorrow brings and take on that charge as it comes. There's risk in that. And what you do is you set up that vulnerability we feel of letting go of something that means so much to us, that we're so invested in. How did you come to write this? And I'll say, write this so perfectly.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And before I start, I want to acknowledge Darnell's piece, because his piece is so brilliant and so moving. And I've read it and I've heard it a few times, and each time it's like something else strikes me about it. So I just want to acknowledge that. When you and I talked about writing the prologue, I simply dipped into my memory of those nights and of sitting around the furniture and all the family being there and everybody just being mad excited because you knew you were going to laugh and you knew that it was going to be something special.
Yeah.
And the contrast of that life versus the reality of my life, you know, which was a mom with asthma, and which was poverty, and which was making those decisions as to whether or not you were going to be able to eat this versus have that. And, you know, and all of those things, you know, when you grow up in New York, I don't know what it's like to grow up anywhere outside of New York, but when you grow up in New York, there's this hardness that happens to children. And you have to adapt. You have to create a tougher skin. You have to know how to not allow cruel words to hurt you. And those words come from you know, your classmates. It comes from your teachers. There's just a harsh roughness around being a child in New York. And so the fact that those problems didn't really, you know, reach the Huxtables. Their problems were, you know, whether this sweater was nice, or this boy liked me, or, you know, or if I was going to play the clarinet. And it was such a softer childhood, and I really needed that to sort of see that that there was better outside of what I was experiencing.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a voice that comes with your work that it's almost like it underscores the entire piece, and it says, "Don't forget me. I'm here too." Right? We celebrate the Huxtables and we celebrate a version of us.
Right.
And I think, you know, the Cosby Show came at a time where we spent in the previous decades getting to know the Evans family, good times. And we knew of an affluent family through the Jeffersons, but they also had like a point of departure that was rooted in poverty. So there was this idea, and then Sanford and Son also. So there's this idea that Black people were by and large poor, because that's what we saw. That was the depiction of us on television. Go all the way back, you know, even further to Julia. Julia wasn't, you know, Diana Carroll wasn't necessarily depicted as a poor woman, but she was depicted as a single mother who was, you know, doing all she can to make a way for herself and her son. And we don't get anything that kind of resembles a middle class.
Yeah. So, but it's interesting you say that, because there's another part of that for me personally. When you say, "Don't forget us," I am Black, Puerto Rican, and Filipino. So I am as multicultural as they come. And so for me to be represented in the Black culture, but for Claire to be able to speak Spanish, and for there to be, you know, Spanish artists and Black artists and all different kinds, and white artists, and just this blending of talent, this blending of beauty, and for it to be seen as exceptional, to be seen as beautiful, you know, it was it was hard growing up when you're multicultural, because what happens is that you're never enough of one thing.
Okay.
And so it almost always feels like you have to decide. And in that show, I didn't have to decide. I could just be both. I could be all of who I was, and all of who I was welcomed and celebrated. Yeah. And that was so important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Didn't you love it when Claire broke out into Spanish?
Oh my God, it was so dope, and it was so sexy, and it was so beautiful, and it sounded so smart, and it sounded just exceptional. And you know, we were ingrained to think that it was ugly, and we were ingrained to think that it was something that made us less than. And what she did was she made it another layer to her. Something that made her more than. And that was gorgeous. And that was necessary.
Yeah. I couldn't imagine anyone else being Claire Huxtable in that series than Felicia Rashad. Well, I will say, however, we do have an amazing person playing Claire in the series. Y'all come back and stay tuned. I see she left a message in the thing. We have an amazing cast who will take over the storytelling starting Thursday when we present Theo. But Felicia Rashad brought a class to the trope of Black mama. And I say the trope because I think we saw amazing women play Black mothers in television, taking nothing away from Esther Roll, taking nothing away from Donna Carroll, taking nothing away from, you know, any of the women who portrayed being the bond of the family, right? But Claire, Felicia Rashad's Claire had an elevation in a sense to motherhood. But she also had a distance to it. I can't help but think sometimes that there was an embrace that Esther Roll brought to being the matriarch of the family that I didn't feel as warm from Claire. But I wasn't missing anything either, you know? And what that did was that told us that there is no such thing as the Black family or the Black community or the Black neighborhood or the Black narrative. We come in so many different variations. And that's what, for me, and you've already said it, that's what the Cosby Show brought to the table, in that it gave America a different version of us. The problem, The problem, though, with American audiences, and I can't speak for other audiences. I don't know what people do elsewhere, but I know here that when people are shown something on television, that tends to be the thing that they think is it. So if I show you Snowfall, young black men are drug dealers. Right. If I show you the Cosby Show during that time period, well, black people have made it. There is no more struggle. Right. No one is living in the ghetto anymore because they all don't you know they've all made it. There are no more troubles. What are you talking about? We're equal now. And that was a phenomenon that happened during the Cosby Show. The world ended up getting, or the US ended up getting this rose-colored haze by watching the Huxtable family, and that there was no need to address issues, poverty, homelessness. This is also during this time, the rise and height of HIV and AIDS. Right. Never mentioned that on the Cosby Show, but then A Different World was pioneering in that it was the first time we saw a character of any sort talk about HIV that was outside of the LGBTQ community. A straight woman had contracted HIV on A Different World, and no one had touched that topic. So the Cosby Show had this feel good to it, to a detriment. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think that it anesthetized, everything that could be harmful for the purview. I think the intent was to show the best of us, and I think that, and I think it did so beautifully. But what I also think happened was that it did so beautifully that it wasn't a tangible thing. It wasn't anything that anyone could say, yeah, that's reality. Well, anyone who was living in the actual reality of that time, that was the idealistic of it. So what it did was it created this beautiful narrative. And I think that narrative went with how we were supposed to perceive what life was.
Sure.
That we had gotten to this point where racism wasn't really that big of an issue any longer, and that you can have this middle class life, and that America was moving forward in a way, leaps and bounds than we had in the 70s and the 80s or even the 60s. We're at this point now where success and doctors and lawyers and all of these different things, that's the norm, or that's attainable.
Yeah.
And for many of us, it wasn't, but it was something beautiful to see.
Absolutely, without question. I'm going to ask that Darnell's brought back into the conversation. We're going to continue to chat a little bit about this, but we can also take some questions. We're streaming live on YouTube. We're streaming live on Facebook. We're streaming live on Twitter via Periscope. Our feed on LinkedIn didn't launch like I had planned, but we can reload that a little bit later. So if anyone has any questions, go ahead and put them. I'd say we're probably the best bet right now is actually putting your questions on the Facebook feed because we can see it both here in our interface, but I can see it over here also on Facebook. Before I get to it, though, one of my favorite things about the Cosby Show were the kids. Mm-hmm. We could talk all day about Cliff and Claire, but I think the heart of that show were the kids. Who was your favorite? And it might be two different answers. Who was your favorite, and who were you most like?
Okay, so my favorite was Vanessa. Like, I don't know. I just felt like she needed the love from me because I feel like she didn't get it from the rest of the family. She felt like a basement child. I was like,
Time out. Because I got to cackle a little bit. He said she seemed like she needed the love. I can't.
I'm telling you, I don't know if they loved her properly. Wow. She was definitely my favorite. She was just out there. She just lived her life. It was just like, I'm just living my life. I'm going to have fun. I'm going to do this. And I feel like Denise was. I feel like I'm most like Denise. Just with that, just carefree. I'm just going with the wind. But I feel like Vanessa was very similar. She just did it a different way. She wasn't as much of a hippie. I feel like I'm more hippie, but yeah, Vanessa was definitely my favorite. I just think that she went to Baltimore, to have big fun
with the wretched. Let me tell you something. And I just had a conversation with, I don't know who I was talking about with this. That episode. Now we were talking about Felicia Rashad playing Claire Huxtable. And elevating the role of the black mom. That episode, however, she looked like every black mama. I mean, they never talked about anybody getting a whooping or nothing like that. But when she jumped at Vanessa, when Cliff had to catch Vanessa, catch Claire from jumping at, I was like, Mom, y'all see that?
That was it.
That was it. That's when you knew.
Yeah. Right. You see what you look like? No, I'm just kidding. No.
That was it. She was my favorite. I most like Denise though.
Okay.
And I'm actually the opposite. I'm totally the opposite. My most favorite was Denise. I thought she was the coolest. I loved her confidence. I loved her clothes. I loved her swag. I loved her weirdness. I still wanted to be that confident and that weird and that accepted. I was not. But I was most like Vanessa. I was so awkward, and I was so, I think her character overthought everything. And as a child, I overthought everything.
Yeah.
So her weirdness and her, I think that during her time, she was just in that awkward phase of childhood when she was like, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And that's just a rough time no matter who you are. So for her growing up in that light and, year after year, she became more and more herself. She became more and more, comfortable in her skin. But, them 11, 12, 13 years, whoo, you could see she was in the struggle. And that's me. That was me. I was in that struggle, just trying to figure it all out.
Why don't you all watching tell us who your favorite Huxtable kid was and who you were most like, even if they're different. For me, my favorite, and I think the person that's true. My favorite was Theo. Mm-hmm. Theo had a style, a sensibility. I think I've always kind of been, masculine of center. I've always loved being a woman, but I wanted to be Theo. I think he just emulated a kind of ease and a flow in life that I just found infectious. I think I was, in fact, most like Vanessa, the awkward, just good in school, did really well in school. But then as I got older, it was like, school's mule, I like that boy, or, let me go play basketball. Let me do all these other distracted things. And Vanessa kind of had that same track too. Early in the series, she was kind of, placed as this wonder kid who did really well in school. And then it was like, she went into this rebellious stage and golly, that seemed a lot like my life in a lot of ways.
Did she ever make it out of that rebellious stage? I don't even know if she made it out, because you remember she went to college.
Right now, yeah.
Ricky, it was just a long series of bad decisions.
Vanessa couldn't win. She could not win. I'm trying to think back on that one, like if there was a moment where she did a thing and the family was like, Vanessa, she was never celebrated. You're right.
Never. It really wasn't. She was even the locomotion. Even the locomotion was not celebrated.
Oh, yeah.
I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So, we've got so many awesome responses online, and we're going to build on that as the series goes on, of course. How are you guys feeling about, we're going to finish with this. How are you guys feeling about the series? I mean, you've read the book, you know what it is. We've all kind of been separate from it for a good while, of course. But within this construct, we have this, we're staying at home and we're following all the rules and stuff. What do you see this series as being in terms of serving as some form of entertainment?
So I'll start if you guys don't mind. I think that it's a welcome reprieve. I think that it allows for us to and when I say us, I mean anyone who's reading this for the first time or absorbing this for the first time, or you putting this out on this venue for the very first time. I think it allows us to go back to a time, or to think about a time and how that time would look now. And and to close this chapter in the way that you did, I think was breathtakingly beautiful. I really, really do. I really commend you for that. Because I don't know that I knew that we needed that. I don't know that I knew that it was something that was a whole until now. And I love that you're putting it out there. I love that it's a resurgence of this topic, because it's not one that I think would be celebrated by anyone else, and not in the way that this is being done. I think it's beautiful.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. For me, I think I was one of the ones. I know I was one of the ones who said, I read Theo when you first wrote this.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, where's the rest? I'm like, I've known you more than half my life at this point, and coming from Counting Stars and Smelling Roses, and knowing the work that you've done, I knew what was to come if you were to finish this, and it's what you produced. It's exactly how I imagined it. And I think it's great, but I also think there's no such thing as just entertainment. Mm-hmm. And so I think that people will watch it and be entertained, but I think I'm hoping that people will watch and get it and get that there are these two things, and you can do this and this at this, and that it's okay, and that they get the point of it all. And I'm just excited to see what happens on Thursday and the coming days. We talked about the rehearsals of other episodes coming. I'm like, oh God! So I'm getting stack ready and tissue and all that.
So, I tell you, when I was writing it, when I was writing the book, and this also happened when I wrote Passage Home, and it happens when I write in general, but I was having these real reactions, right? These emotions, as if the man really died. I was like, wait a minute, I started this path, and how do I finish it? And what we're experiencing isn't killing a character. It's a celebration of a family. It's a celebration of a creative entity. It's a celebration of the Huxtables, right? And of who we were and who we are, A, as a result of knowing that narrative, and B, as a result of being stronger than the scandal that threatens to darken it. I know that Cliff Huxtable will never be able to have his day in the sun ever again, because he shares the face of someone who devastated many, many lives. Whatever side you're on of that argument of whether you believe he did it, I won't get into that. Lives were still devastated. And Cliff has to wear that, right? So you will never be able to watch. I get it. You'll never be able to watch the Cosby Show without thinking, there go that predator. And then all of a sudden you're watching everything he does on screen, making Vanessa jump up and down to make sure her breast doesn't fall out the top of her costume, for instance. Right. Side note, that just gave me goosebumps when I watched it when it first aired. And so now I feel like, okay, I think I have reason to understand why I felt like that seemed inappropriate. But with this series, I hope what it does is it allows us to keep the Huxtable family moving forward, and even maybe inspire even more narratives where they're concerned. We live in a time now where people are rebooting their favorite shows. Perhaps this is a part of that exercise, right? And I had one last thought, and it just escaped me because I'm just excited about all the things at once. All the things at once. I want to thank you both for giving us your time tonight.
Thank you.
A pleasure.
We're about to do a thing. It's going to be awesome. We're just going to have fun. as much fun as we can during this pandemic. Darnell mentioned before we talked, before the live stream started, that we've been rehearsing some of the upcoming scenes or chapters that you'll see, episodes from this tale that you will see. On Thursday, we will be bringing to you chapter 1. It's entitled Theo. And performing in the role of Theo will be Vincent Powell. He's an amazing director, graduated from USC's Cinematic School of the Arts, and is a Houston native. And I'm excited to be working with this brother again. We rehearsed last night this, and when I tell you he's going to give us the goods. We also have a panel, and our first panel discussion, the topic is respectability politics and Black Lives Matter. Can they coexist? And that panel will include Grady Johnson, professor at Prairie View A&M University, Monique Thomas, an educator in Pasadena, California, Alexander Hardy, an activist and public commentator, and someone who just simply has his finger on the pulse of all things good and righteous, and Quincy Gosfield, who is a leader and a revolutionary in television and film. He and his husband have recently been nominated for a Daytime Emmy for their latest show that's airing on Amazon Prime. And they will be our 4 panelists on Thursday, along with Vincent, who will be reading in the role of Theo. So that said, I want you to come back and join us on Thursday at 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central, 6 o'clock Mountain, 5 o'clock Pacific. There we go, all the time zones. Wherever you do your social media stuff, we'll make sure the LinkedIn link is working better, but you can certainly see us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. Join us for some story time. Monday, Thursday. Every Monday and Thursday will be a new chapter until July 9th. July 9th will be a special night because it will not only be the final episode of the series, but we will have Dr. Carolyn Gordon, the Reverend Dr. Carolyn Gordon, eulogize Heathcliff Huxtable, Dr. Heathcliff Huxtable, as the epilogue of the book, which she did write for the book. She wrote the epilogue in the form of a eulogy. She will be presenting that eulogy, and we will be doing that episode via Zoom because we want all of our cast members and all of our panelists to join us that night live on air as she eulogizes him, and we can together have our own repast and celebration of Dr. Heathcliff Huxtable. Thank you all again for joining us tonight. We look forward to seeing you on Thursday, same place, same time. All right, good night. Bye-bye, y'all.